Okay, thanks for stopping by. As you know, this is our second lesson in the book of Genesis, and we were ending with Cain and Abel being born to Adam and Eve. And as you remember, with Adam and Eve, they were kicked out of the garden and forbidden to eat from the tree of life, which was a good thing because we don't want them to live in a fallen state forever. And so being kicked out of the garden forces them to die, but it allows them to be redeemed by the blood of the Lamb that Jesus Christ would shed later on in history. Of course, Cain and Abel being born to Adam and Eve, you know the story of what takes place is that Cain kills Abel. His sacrifice is not accepted because Cain is a tiller of the ground. He's a farmer, and he wants to bring in a vegetable or a fruit sacrifice, where Abel is a herder of sheep and he brings a blood sacrifice. The forgiveness of sins, it commands a blood sacrifice, and Abel brings the firstlings of his flock. He brings the best to God in a sacrifice, in an act of worship. And of course, you know what Abel, he brings the fruit of the ground. So possibly, maybe it wasn't even good fruit. Maybe it was reject fruit. And that's something that will be forbidden in the law in years to come. And so Cain is very wroth, and God warns Cain and tells him, hey, don't do this. If you're going to get all mad about it, sin lies at the door. And of course, you know the rest of the story. Because of the sin of Cain, he kills his brother Abel, and Abel is taken out. Of course, Adam and Eve have another son, and the other son is Seth, which leads into the bloodline of Enoch. Of course, I want to bring Enoch in because to me, Enoch is a type of the rapture. I mean, I'm sure somebody's going to try to correct me, or I'm going to get an email about it, but to me, Enoch in the Old Testament, he walked with God, and the Bible said he was not. He went home to be with the Lord. And to me, that's a kind of type of the rapture. That's what makes one of the proof texts in the Pentateuch or in the Torah of the rapture. It's the precedent is set in the Old Testament, and not only is it set in the Old Testament, such as the way Elijah was taken up, but it's also a proof text in the Torah and in the Pentateuch. So we find that Enoch is raptured out, and he was not, and he's taken away with God. But somewhere along the line, the world becomes very evil and a very violent place. And this is the pre-Diluvian age. And when I say pre-Diluvian, that's just the pre-flood age. And so there is evil. And we're kind of like in that place now, you know, with the cartels and drug addiction and the drug scenes and just wars. The world has become a very violent place. Gangs and robberies and things of this nature. The world is a very violent place. But there's one guy that finds grace in the eyes of God, and this man is called Noah. You know, the interesting thing about Noah is that God tells him to build an ark, and that is something that is totally unprecedented, that God would tell him to build a boat when at this time it doesn't even rain. The rain doesn't happen at this time. God tells Noah to build an ark, and he obeys God, but Noah leads a balanced life. He does three things. He plants his crops, he makes his living, he builds the ark, which is going to lead to his salvation, and then he also is a preacher of righteousness. He's trying to tell people to get ready, that there is a disaster coming. God is going to flood the earth. Now there's a precedent being set here with Noah. The very fact is that before God brings any judgment on the face of the earth, he first tells his prophets. He first tells somebody that judgment is coming. He doesn't leave the earth without a witness. And so we see Noah, a preacher of righteousness, and 7 others are going to be saved by this flood. Now the interesting thing is that in all major cultures across the world, I don't care if you're in Siberia or the Incas or the Mayans, the Mexicans, it doesn't matter. South Africa, North America, every major culture in the world talks about a flood and 8 people being saved in that flood. It's in every oral history of every culture on the face of the earth. And except for the Chinese, which they said there was actually 16 people saved. So there is a oral history that has been passed on down through the ages. And possibly as a child, you may have heard the story of Noah and the ark. Now, the ark that Noah built is simply a chest or a box. It wasn't a V-hull. It wasn't like an aircraft carrier or something of that nature that was meant to cut through the water, but it was something that was meant only to float. It was a world that was going to be flooded by water, and it was going to float. You know, now the crazy thing is in the Arizona desert, you have seashells desert. So that tells us at one time the Arizona desert had water covering it. As a child and as a young man, in the mountains of Pennsylvania, we have these gravel pits. And in the gravel pits, we have limestone. And in the limestone, I can remember as just being a little kid, picking up stones and throwing them. But you'd look at the gravel and you'd find a seashell in the gravel. That tells me that the gravel pits, which we get the stone up in the mountains of Pennsylvania, wherever that stone is coming from, was actually covered in water. Even the Grand Canyon, if you look at the Grand Canyon and places like that, of course you think maybe that river cut that Grand Canyon. I really don't think it was just much of the Grand Canyon being cut by a single river, but I believe that water drained away rapidly, and this is what formed the Grand Canyon. If you ever get a chance, they have a replica of the ark down in Kentucky, and if you get a chance, please go down and see it. It is really a place of learning, and it just really will expand your knowledge of what happened during the flood. Now, something happens here. We have a saying around this house that says that 2 things about history. Number 1, history repeats itself, and number 2, nobody learns from history. And we find Jesus in the New Testament talking about Noah and says, as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be in the days of the coming of the Son of Man. And so the coming of Christ parallels the days of Noah. So this is the pre-diluvian, then comes the flood, and then we find that there are parallels in the New Testament that talks about it. Now, great wickedness in the book of Genesis, chapter 6 and verse 5. I'm not going to go through all these. You can look them up on your own. And it says that there was great wickedness in the time of Noah. And in 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 13, it says that evil men and seducers shall wax worse and worse. Just when we thought we've heard the worst that you could ever hear, there's some new way that either an axe murderer or the drug cartels are murdering people, or just evil men and seducers are worse and worse. Genesis chapter 6 and verse 11 says the earth is full of violence. 2 Timothy chapter 3 and verse 1 says there will be perilous times coming. And I'm going to tell you, we live in some perilous times. There's a website called ready.gov where our government is telling the citizens of the United States, get ready, because we live in some perilous times, whether it be from a hurricane, a tornado, a flood, a snowstorm, a drought, or an act of war. Perilous times shall come. Now we also know that in 2 Peter chapter 2 and verse 5, Peter writing that Noah's family was saved from the flood. And we know that also the saints will be spared from God's wrath. In 1 Thessalonians 5 and 9, it says the church is not appointed to wrath. So God's wrath is not against the church. And God's wrath wasn't against Noah. It was against the world. The gospel will be preached everywhere. Matthew chapter 24, that was a great book to read. It's not written chronologically, but it lets you know what's coming on the face of the earth. In the Old Testament, the ungodly were punished by a flood. 2 Peter chapter 3, verses 5 through 7. And of course, in also 2 Peter chapter 3, it says in the New Testament, God's not going to destroy the world a second time because he gave us the rainbow, which was a sign of his covenant that he would not destroy us by flood. However, he will the second time destroy the world by fire. Now, of course, you know that they land on one of the mountains, and we have the three sons of Noah: Ham, Shem, and Japheth. And from their bloodline, we can see that Ham kind of goes toward the South African, or toward south toward the African nation. Shem goes to the Middle East and actually the Far East, and then Japheth becomes part of the European race. And so there you have it. That was our lesson, our second lesson. And just wanted to say thanks for stopping by. And if you're visiting us on YouTube, or if you want to come see us in person, just give us a call or let us know via text, or contact us through Facebook, and we'll let you know when the next lesson's going to be at our house. Thanks for stopping by. We'll see you next time.